Hello and welcome to the Business Channel in association with the China-Britain Business Council. In this programme we tell you what you need to know to develop business in China, and we report on the main commercial questions that tend to come up in building up sales and services. Plus we show how solutions are being found. Britain's trading relationship with China is mushrooming. Exports were up 20% in 2013 and growth is now spreading to new areas of the economy, many of which are increasing at 15 to 20%. Like the US market, which it will soon equal in size, China demands the attention of anyone interested in growth. Challenges remain, but fundamental reforms, such as the liberalisation of its currency, the renminbi, will keep business on an upward trajectory for years to come.
China is the second largest economy now, soon will be the largest economy in the world, and businesses from the UK need to be looking at engaging with this country.
China for me is a very exciting country. Already it accounts for 9.5% of global GDP. In the next 4 years it's due to overtake, I think, the US as the biggest trading nation in the world.
The potential for UK business going over to China for trading activities is huge. China now is the second largest economy in the world. It has a vast domestic market, and it's more so because the Chinese economy is moving away from an export-driven one to more of a domestic consumption-driven one.
I think at the moment, the potential for British companies to build up sales is actually phenomenal, I would say. It's a really good time. If you look at consumer products, for example, I think the opportunities are really limited, confined only perhaps by the number of consumers and also by the desirability of the products. But also, and I think perhaps more importantly, I think the Chinese economy is changing. There's becoming more of a focus on a value add and tangible economy away from manufacturing. And this means that innovation is absolutely vital to Chinese companies. And who better than British companies, which are known well for their innovative technology, to actually help Chinese companies move forward in that way. Some of the areas I think which are important at the moment are the green economy, manufacturing, infrastructure, life sciences, all these areas where British companies are to the fore.
China's richest man, Mr. Zhong, he came across the UK. Now he has plans to open 100 malls over the next 3 years in China, and he's obviously looking for UK products to go into those malls. In particular mid-market brands, and he spoke to a lot of UK retailers at the end of the tour. He basically said that he'd been blown away with the UK products that he'd seen.
Well, I think key things from the education sector are applicable across the board. One is the overall brand of what we call Education UK, but you might refer to as UK PLC. It's known as trustworthy, reliable, good quality, and desirable. So I think while ever the bilateral relationship is good, which usually it is, this facilitates the entry of UK businesses into the China market.
One of the biggest changes taking place in China is the exciting developments in the central and western provinces. These offer new opportunities for British businesses, but in places and cities that most UK companies have never heard of.
Against the backdrop of urbanisation, which China's going through at the moment, that process is going to take decades. By 2025, they're estimated to be around about 1 billion people living in Chinese cities. Now, obviously, Beijing and Shanghai, very keen competition for sales. But if you go to the west of the country, there are many cities with a population of 1 million or more. They're experiencing growth rates of above 13%, so excellent potential.
Demand for more sophisticated lifestyles and products in China is being driven by the millions of consumers who are joining the middle class every year, by the up-and-coming enterprises who are seeking to match Western levels of performance, and by the country's extraordinary switch to a cleaner, more urban way of living.
The prospects for a growing trade and investment relationship between China and the UK are very strong indeed. China's economy is more sophisticated, and Chinese consumers and Chinese businesses want more sophisticated services and products. That's what the UK has to offer.
With that growth has also been the rise of an affluent population, growing middle class, and for them they want to buy the best. Britain stands for quality. Consumer brands are well regarded. So from that perspective, I think there's a lot of opportunity.
China remains one of the world's fastest growing luxury goods markets, ranging from fashion through handbags through to luxury cars, and this is going to continue over the next few years.
Several good examples lies in, say, the auto sector. China has already been the largest auto market in the world. Jaguar Land Rover and McLaren have been the latest entrants into the Chinese market, with the former setting up a joint venture with a local manufacturer, and the latter enhanced recently their distribution channel in China.
One of the most exciting opportunities at the moment is meeting the growing demand from the emerging Chinese consumer. This ranges from educating Chinese children, either in China or in the UK, through to the provision of high quality healthcare. This can be pharmaceuticals, it can be medical devices, and even the expertise that we have in the UK in terms of managing hospitals.
Healthcare is another good example. China has a huge population, but it is also an aging population. By 2050, the population of over 60 years old will grow to 400 million, which is threefold from what it is now. 400 million, if you think about it, is more than the population for the United States today. And the current infrastructure, the hospital, clinic management expertise, and the service level cannot cope with such increase. And on the other hand, if you look like UK, the management expertise in that area could be well valued in China.
China continues to invest quite heavily in its infrastructure. For instance, in airports, where the UK has great expertise in designing world-class airports. China's also continuing to invest in high-speed rail, and a number of UK companies are participating in that programme. I think another really exciting area is in eco-cities, where companies with expertise in clean tech, green tech, in environmentally friendly buildings and intelligent buildings have great prospects as China continues to urbanise very rapidly.
It can be challenging to move goods and people across China's borders, but it's becoming progressively easier for SMEs to access the market, particularly as many sectors are hardly regulated at all.
China remains a challenging market for companies of any size, but over the last decade, each year, China has become easier for SMEs. But it's not straightforward, but there's lots of help available from organisations like CBBC and UK Trade and Investment. SMEs should use that.
Well, I think it depends in the industry. Some industries are highly regulated and it can be more difficult, such as automotive or aerospace. But for many companies, the hurdles are not high at all. Regulatory obstacles are really not there. It's actually quite easy to start trading in China.
As long as you have the right paperwork in place, moving goods in and out of the country is really not too onerous. But keep up to date. Be aware that there are changes around it, and most particular, they are starting to X-ray containers, cargoes at port side. Now, this means that if you have a split cargo container and you don't have the right paperwork in place, it's going to take you a lot of time and money really to rectify that.
It's generally easy to move people, information or goods in and out of the country nowadays because China has very good internet infrastructure, very good logistic infrastructure, and immigration-wise, and compared to the UK, when it comes to visa issuing, China is not that more difficult.
As far as visas are concerned for people in and out of the country, it can take a little bit of time. There are some changes we understand coming up soon from the Chinese embassies, and one of those being that you may well only be able to get a visa in your country of residence. Just take your time, be prepared, don't leave things to the last minute.
Different kinds of businesses come up against different kinds of treatment on the Chinese side. There are famous cases in the media about where people have tripped up over the additional payments, perhaps to local officials. In the education sector where I work, this is not something that's highly visible, or indeed something that's presented to you on a daily basis. And so we enjoy perhaps a more relaxed relationship. But I think the regulations need to be really well understood by your side, which is again where you need the ability to read Chinese within your team. But also you need to have a good contact on the Chinese side who will be your bridge through all these negotiations, because the stronger your relationship with your Chinese partner, the more willing they are to go the extra mile to find their way through the regulations to the goal that you're both trying to achieve.
If businesses want to make an impact in China, they soon find that personal relationships and mutual understanding are just as important as the commercial terms and legal details.
I think the mistake that companies make or people make when looking to trade in China is not recognising it's a different culture. They're possibly not doing the level of research that they would need to do before they make that step.
There needs to be a very big emphasis on the bilateral mutuality of any agreement, and that's the same in business as it is in diplomatic relations and education and so on. So I think it's very important for the Chinese side not to be seen to be losing face. However, mutuality from their point of view always means gains for the Chinese side. So you need to also be really clear what you want to get out of it as well, and what your bottom line is as well.
People need to realise that there are different priorities for the Chinese businessman. British businessman goes into a meeting, he looks at the business, the legalities, and then the relationship. Chinese businessman, he looks at the relationship first, then the business, then the legal documentation.
Negotiation in China is more of an art than science. Chinese people are not very confrontational. They don't like confrontations. And negotiation can be confrontational. To mitigate that, I think personal relationship and mutual understanding are very important. Relationship or 关系 in China is ubiquitous, is important for everything. But when it specifically comes down to negotiation, it helps to soften up the situation, bring people back to the table to focus on a common goal, and to interpret into each other's message more realistically and more favorably to the common goal.
You might be happy to make a quick one-off sale, but if you want to create a more sustainable flow of business, then it's worth making sure that you've asked the right questions about the fundamentals of how your business is going to work in China.
It's not easy at all to start cold, I think, if you have no contacts and no knowledge, and this is where an organisation like the China-Britain Business Council can be very helpful for those first steps. I think the route to success is to begin with one contact, one relationship, one business partner who can then become your advocate on the Chinese side. And once you've built up a reputation for being a reliable friend, being a good supplier, and also being a tough negotiator on price, I think you'll be well respected. And those partners that you develop in the first relationship will then extend your network for you on the ground.
As SMEs begin to think about China for the first time, they really first of all need to do their homework, understand the nature of the opportunity for their business in what is a continental market. SMEs cannot cope with the whole of China at one time, so they need to focus on a particular geographic area. Then they need to understand the nature of their competition, both domestic competition, because Chinese companies are rapidly growing, and international competition, because there's lots of competition from around the world in such a fast-growing country. And then they need to think about all of the practical issues. Who are the right partners to do business with? Have they got intellectual property that they need to protect? And then also, how will they overcome cultural and language differences?
I think it's a lot easier to trade with China today than it was, say, 20 years ago when it was much more of a closed society. I also think there is much more help for a company looking to trade with China. We have the UK Embassy that's very active, the China-Britain Business Council and UKTI, all these institutions there to support.
Interesting enough, the Chinese-British Business Council have actually have provided a service called Launchpad, and they actually go around and employ a Chinese businessman for you or businesswoman for you who has an office and a PC, and they help generate business, help build your business, and actually help set up your business. You pay from the UK, but that's a very good way of getting into the marketplace.
We posted somebody in the China-Britain Business Council Launchpad scheme in Beijing, which gives us access to actually 11 offices across the whole country, where our staff member can go around and talk to agents, parents, university partners and schools, and really inform them and get our brand out into the China market. So that's been working quite well.
With assistance of your local trading agencies, chambers of commerce in China. And nowadays, the online platforms such as Alibaba and Taobao, it's quite easy to actually sell something over to China. But in reality, if you think about actually make it sustainable, you have to think about whether you have tailored your product or services to your targeted market. You have to look at your marketing initiative in a very targeted and tailored fashion. You have to think about whether you have a robust distribution channel in China and whether you actually need a local partner.
If you try to target all the major cities of China, or both the eastern seaboard and the western hinterland, you're not going to have the capacity to really meet the demands that you may very well generate through your business contacts. So my advice is to start in one particular area, develop a good relationship, and see how that can radiate out across China for you in partnership with your Chinese relationships.
In terms of entering the market generally, I think some of the key advice is do your market research up front. Know who your competitors are, know what the competitive goods have by way of IP protection, know where they employ the majority of their workforce, their headquarters, and distribution channels. All of this is incredibly important because then when you go into that country, you'll know essentially who you're looking to upset and where your battles may have to be fought, or just avoid those areas initially and wait and fight those battles another day.
For practical purposes, it's increasingly making more sense to trade directly in China's currency, the renminbi. But businesses should be ready for fluctuations in its value and for any questions on tax.
The People's Bank of China, the Chinese central bank, they have actually estimated that if you trade by not using the Chinese renminbi, you have an added administrative cost of 2 or 3% on top of your business. And of course, if you are to trade in Chinese renminbi, then you receive the benefits of a keener price point, as well as a wider sales audience. So there's great potential for that. And on top of that, be aware that the United Arab Emirates are actually transacting 40% of their trade with China in the renminbi.
I think it's easy if you're doing it within the rules and you're following regulation. This is a communist country. Foreign exchange, for example, is very tightly controlled by the State Administration for Foreign Exchange, SAFE. One would need to always get the right advice, and it's not just at a national level.
Have a currency risk management strategy in place. Sterling lost 8% of its value against the dollar earlier this year in 12 weeks, 10% against the renminbi. For those clients who are concerned about that loss in value, we were able to suggest they lock in their prices forward either for 6 or 12 months. For those clients that considered they would benefit from that currency movement, we introduced them to our options desk who are FCA regulated. The options desk suggested that they actually take out an option which would allow them to buy sterling at designated levels if the price went higher, but if it went lower they could actually buy at more competitive prices. Both sets of clients were really happy because they could both guard and safeguard their gross profit margins. They were very happy indeed.
Although RMB has been increasingly liberalized and we have enjoyed an increased level of currency conversion freedom, it is still controlled by the government. State Administration of Foreign Exchange, aka SAFE, is the government body that governs all the Chinese RMB going out of the country. So they also seek a clearance from other government bodies such as the tax bureaus and the customs before they give you the approval. Therefore, planning ahead on your exit strategy or your reinvest strategy is very important.
Another issue that can happen is that people need to be aware that they're taking foreign exchange risk if they're trading in renminbi or maybe US dollars. They need to have a currency risk strategy in place to manage that. And on another point, VAT and tax. We had a situation a few months ago. A business came in to us and said, every time I send an invoice to China, when I get it paid back, I'm losing 11% of my invoice. So what's going on? So we sat them down. Had a look, they were losing 6% on VAT, and we introduced them to a Chinese VAT specialist. The other 4 or 5% was actually being lost to foreign exchange, so we helped them on that as well.
Do you go it alone and retain control, or find a partner to share the rewards and the risks? Your answer will probably depend on how much is at stake and how you're going to be regulated.
Well, I think there's a number of opportunities here and a number of ways you can trade in China. If you want to, for example, stay in the UK and use a Chinese partner to help build business, you can license your technology or you can license your brand. You could appoint a Chinese agent or a Chinese distributor. But if you want to set up an enterprise in China, there's a number of different ways you can go. You can set up a representative office, or you could set up what's called a WFOE, which is a wholly foreign-owned enterprise. Or you can set up a joint venture with a local Chinese partner. And obviously setting up a wholly owned enterprise at WFOE would give you complete control of that business in China, but many UK companies prefer to enter into some sort of joint venture arrangement with a Chinese partner.
It depends on your specific strategy and the resource available within your organization. And also specifically the sector you are playing. There are certain sectors the government control is less than others. For instance, if you are entering the financial services sector, the telecommunication potentially sector, and infrastructure related sector, education sector, all these are more controlled and governed by the Chinese government than others. And there are restrictions on setting up your entity, and most likely people have to comply as in a joint venture entity setup.
I think the Chinese are no different to any other nation. They would want the longest terms possible to pay. It is a different market. One can enter the market through using agents, maybe through Hong Kong, where there is more knowledge of Western, sort of business practices as well as the East, or deal directly. I think whichever route one takes, research again is the key. And also, if you're using an agent or looking at a joint venture partnership, make sure you know who you're talking to.
To secure the best terms for any business in China, it's necessary first to create a convivial sense of the big picture, then ensure all parties have a realistic grasp of what all the details are going to mean in practice.
My experience of China is the Chinese, first of all, will look for face-to-face meetings. It's a bit of a courtship for them. They want to feel special, so they would expect you to go out and be with them for a while, get to know them. I think, though, any negotiation, you need to have the right advisors next to you. Certainly if you're doing any sort of form of high-value contract, you would want a firm of lawyers that has the Chinese expertise. You need to understand whether you want to use local law or UK law. Of course, I would always suggest you try and push for UK law or Hong Kong as a compromise.
In terms of agreements, I think Chinese companies are not necessarily always as sophisticated, and they're used to much shorter agreements. They're looking for something that maybe is a one-page, sets out the basic terms. So what I would say to anybody looking to do business in China or develop a partnership is insist that the document be detailed and cover all the key commercial terms, but avoid legal jargon and try not to be too one-sided.
Chinese people are not particularly detailed people when it comes to negotiation. So based on that, start with head terms, key terms and conditions that would help you to come up with a framework or direction of the agreement and refine them into details with professional services from the lawyers would help you to actually arrive at the final agreement without being too confrontational and make the process a less pain for your Chinese partner, and therefore make it easier for your message to get across and make them more receptive.
A lot is made in terms of negotiating and setting up agreements of the kind of hospitality you will enjoy in China, and also the kind of conviviality in the way people are very smiley and very friendly. That is the surface, but underneath there's a very steely determination to get the best deal possible for the Chinese side. And I think what we lack often is the real understanding of what our bottom line is, and I think that needs to be thought out very clearly before going in to any negotiation or any agreement. When you're in China, there's also the deadline of your flight home, and there is what I always call one last-minute ship in terms of the fact that they will start to renegotiate things on your way to the airport. If you don't feel happy with it, you can say no.
You'll probably have to negotiate quite hard, and be aware actually that the Chinese businessman will actually do his due diligence on you as much as you do on him. You'll also probably have to wait a little bit at times, and you'll also have to complete a little bit of paperwork.
I think the keys are patience, being cautious, and also thinking long term. I like to equate looking for a Chinese partner like you would look for a partner in life. In other words, approach it like you would approach you want to marry somebody. I think it's a good analogy because the courtship period can be either very short or it can be very drawn out. It just depends on the partner. But the key in both situations is that once the deal is done, you are locked into a long-term commitment, which can be very difficult to get out of without undue hardship.
I'm going to make a plea for the non-native speaker of Chinese as a person that should be used within UK businesses to be able to promote relationships in China. Because if you are there relying upon Chinese interpretation, then you're only going to hear what they tell you directly and you have no eavesdropping. My main skill, I think, in business negotiations is hearing and understanding what the Chinese are talking about among themselves and then reinterpreting that back to my colleagues. And I think that's very important.
For all its potential, take nothing on trust in China. Before you put your name to any agreement, make sure you've fully checked the background of any partners, money, facilities, or intellectual property.
There's a whole layer of risk management and a level of due diligence you have to go through. When you put all these elements together, it can be quite daunting. And hence, to make this work, professional services with a very structured approach is very key. Other than looking at the current strategy you have with China in terms of the products, the services, the marketing approach, the piece of advice I would give to my clients is to conduct robust due diligence to your partners in China. These due diligence can be financial, commercial, operational, and even on the integrity of individuals.
I think many companies are quite eager to get into the market without considering the long-term aspects of why they're there or what they hope to achieve. And I don't think you can underestimate the difficulty in China in understanding the different legal, administrative and cultural environment. I can't really be overstated. So companies really have got to do their homework, they've got to do due diligence, they've actually got to take proper local advice where they need to. And I would say that once your enterprise is up and running, you absolutely must actively monitor it. It's not sufficient, for example, to have a local manager who speaks the language. That person may or may not have the relevant regulatory or legal experience. So you have to be hands-on in your approach to managing your enterprise in China and not just take reports every quarter, for example.
As a firm who assists UK clients going over to China for trade and investment activities, we have seen horrible examples, such as the people are not what the business card said, the factories are nothing more than a hollow showroom, and the registered capital mysteriously disappeared from the joint venture. And therefore, conducting a robust level of due diligence is vitally important.
For all these companies going to China, whether it's innovative companies or selling your brand, I think you have to be sure that you protect your intellectual property before you go to China, before you put your toe in the door, basically. You have to do that. Because otherwise you could have problems in China protecting your intellectual property if you haven't protected it before you actually take that leap.
No business need feel alone in asking any of these questions. Many others have experienced the same dilemmas, and over the years of China's extraordinary transformation, a whole network of support, research and advice has been built up through bodies like CBBC. The aim is to point enterprises like yours in the right commercial, legal and cultural directions as the story of China's dynamic transformation continues to unfold. Well, that's just about all we've got time for at the moment, but if you'd like to know more about any of the organisations that we featured, then visit our website, thebusinesschannel.tv. Bye-bye for now.